Yes.
Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome back to our Cooper Book Club reading Between the Wines. We are on chapter 14. We were talking about positive punishment interventions. Last week we ended on RIRD. So today we're going to start on contingent exercise. Contingent exercise is an intervention in which the client is required to perform a response that is not topographically related to the problem behavior. So topography is what it looks like, right? So what it looks like is not related to the problem behavior. Contingent exercise has been found effective as punishment for various self-stimulatory, stereotypic, disruptive, aggressive, and self-injurious behaviors. In perhaps the most frequently cited example of contingent exercise as a punisher, they found that the repetition of mild exercise contingent on aggressive behavior by two boys with severe disabilities reduced to near zero levels. Okay, so the boys are getting aggressive and maybe they make them do like 5 jumping jacks or 10 push-ups or something like that. So some mild exercise that's contingent on the aggressive behavior. So, oh, because you did that, then we have to do our 10 push-ups or something like that. So that's what they mean by contingent exercise. So I guess they will eventually get tired of it or just get really buff if they continue to engage in the behavior. So in this particular case, they were able to get it down to 0. So clearly it was not a very fun replacement behavior. So that's why they're calling it that positive punishment. Increasing the effort of force or force required to perform a behavior can be an effective tactic for reducing responding. That is also very true. So you're increasing the response effort that it takes for me to have to complete this behavior. An example of this that I can kind of think of is like, let's say clients picks their nose all the time. And so every time they pick their nose, you make him go wash his hands. And so now it's increasing the response effort required for me to pick my nose. So I pick my nose and then I have to wash my hands and then dry them and then come back and all this stuff. And so she added all this extra effort. So he's like, you know what? It's not even worth it. I'll just not pick my nose, or I'll use a tissue like she asked me to. So that's what they mean about increasing the effort or force required to perform a behavior. Makes it an effective tactic for reducing responding. There is no consensus as to whether punishment accounts for the reducing responding. As with response blocking, one perspective from which increased response effort can be conceptualized as a punishment procedure is to consider the movement necessary to come in contact with the increased effort requirements as a member of the target behavior response class. Oh, I just want to tell you guys how beneficial it has been for me to do these little classes with you guys. So I was talking to a parent the other day, and she wasn't understanding or was wondering, like, why does my child only hit me, or why am I the target? And usually parents are the ones that implement a lot of punishment procedures, right? Parents are the ones that are constantly punishing. And so in my head, I was like, I thought back to our last class, which was the negative effects of punishment. And that's one of them. One of the negative effects of punishment is that they're gonna fight back, you know, like it's going, the behavior is going to increase in a way, maybe with that particular person that is the one that's implementing the punishment procedure. So we always want to be very careful with punishment. But I just thought it was so cool that I had just recently taught you guys about that. And then I was like, oh, well, negative effects of punishment. And I also gave a Cooper example, which was the example where they say that the magnitude of the punishment can also affect the behavior. So like the example that they gave in Cooper about the shock. So if they're getting like a tiny shock, they might just like do a little twitch. But if it's like an intense shock, then they're gonna squirm and try to get out of there, right? And so that's the example that Cooper had. I just thought that was funny, and I was like, oh, I need to tell them that this is working. So it's not just you guys that needs to know this stuff. It's me too, working in the field every day. So I use all of the information that I'm spitting. It is useful stuff.
That's great.
Okay, so we also have overcorrection. Overcorrection is a behavior reduction tactic in which, contingent on each occurrence of the problem behavior, the learner is required to engage in effortful behavior that is directly or logically related to the problem behavior. So overcorrection, right? That is the one where we are making them do more than what they originally had to do. And there's two types of overcorrection, right? There's the restitutional overcorrection, which is that it's going to be better than it was before. And then you also have positive practice, where you're engaging in the correct behavior over and over and over. So restitutional overcorrection will be an example that I could think of for that is like, let's say they got really upset and threw the Legos all over the room. And so then you're like, okay, now we're gonna clean up the Legos and we're gonna organize the bookshelf and we're gonna sweep the floor. So that's restitutional overcorrection, is where you're adding and making you're making the environment like better than it was before. So that behavior you're correcting, plus you're gonna clean a little bit more as well. So that's considered a punishment procedure. And then positive practice. Oh my gosh, that is like one of my biggest pet peeves. I do not like, well, I mean, I guess in different contexts and different BCBAs think differently, but positive practice to me is so annoying. And so a lot of people, they overgeneralize interventions. So you guys might see this happen, like, let's say an RBT has been in the field for many years, and previously in their last clinic, whenever a client eloped, they would make them go back to the original location, come back, go back to the original location, come back, go back to the original location, come back. So you do that over and over and over and over, or something like that, or you're like, walk with me, this is walking with me. And so you like do the same thing over and over and over and over. To me, that's really aversive. And what was I gonna say? Oh, and you're just bringing all this unnecessary attention to the behavior over and over and over, in my opinion. So I try to stray away from overcorrection in that particular type of situation. But if needed, possibly overcorrection can be helpful as a method for decreasing disruptive and maladaptive behaviors of adults with intellectual disabilities in institutional settings. it combines the suppressive effects of punishment and the educative effects of positive practice. So it's punishment and positive practice at the same time. And then it includes either restitution, which is we're making it better than it was before, or we're doing positive practice where we're engaging in the behavior over and over. Any questions or examples that you guys want to or you guys want to try to give? Because remember, if we're able to explain it to each other, then that means you're able to test on it. So does anybody want to try to give an example of restitutional overcorrection or positive practice?
I have an example, but I don't know where it fits exactly. I remember if you walk in the lawns, they'll ask you to go back and then go and take the right route. So where would that be?
What was it?
If you walk in the lawn, on the lawns,
Oh, okay.
yeah, they'll actually go back to the original place you were coming from and go and use the right pavement.
Oh, okay.
Overcorrection.
Yeah, they're doing overcorrection.
Okay.
Maybe positive, maybe like a positive practice, but just one time, not making you do it over and over and over.
Yeah, just one time.
Yeah, so it can be like a positive practice procedure kind of in a way. But it would be like a really solid positive practice if they made you get off the lawn, go the right way, and then go back and then go back and go back and do it like 3 times.
Yeah, sometimes they do let you do
Yep.
so that you
And
always
again.
remember.
Yep. And again,
Yeah.
I was-
I mean, I use a lot of these things like on my kids.
yep.
But it's different than like on your own children than on a client, you know? So like with my kids, I might be like, do it better.
Yep.
And then they'll have to do it again. But with clients, like I always try to kind of stray away from punishment, and people don't realize that it's punishment. They think
Mhm.
that it's fine. They're like, oh, it's positive, you know, like he's just going back and forth, back and forth. But that's actually a punishment procedure. So you always want to make sure that you've exhausted all reinforcement options before you go to punishment. So if I was the BCBA that was like, oh, okay, for elopement, we're going to use positive practice, then I would be breaking some ethical boundaries because I just went straight into punishment and I didn't even probe or try any reinforcement alternatives. So that would be bad on my part. So you always want to just make sure that you can reinforce first.
Or what about the example of when a kid runs in the house, you know, like they're playing outside and they run in the house. And I've said, you know, go back out and come back in.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I do that too, like with my kids, or if they slam the door,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, do it again, but the right way.
And I wonder, is that a thing like culturally we learned that like,
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah.
It might be because that's the way that like our Mexican moms are. So it's
or even like the lawn, like Pete said, the lawn. Go back.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's so rude. I have to tell my kids that too. I'm like, don't walk on their lawn. That's not your house.
I remember in the elementary school, if you talk in class, they'll let you write, I won't talk again, the whole book.
Yeah.
The whole book. I won't talk in class again.
Yeah, so
That's overcorrection, right?
Yes, that's positive practice. They're definitely using punishment procedure. Like, I will never talk in class again. I'll never talk in class again. Never talk. And your hand is all tired and you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to talk in class again.
Yes, because you wrote so much. That was a good one.
That was a good one. And that was like, I feel like back in our day, I wonder if they still do that.
Right, right.
Okay, positive practice over correction. Oh, we already talked about those. What is this one telling us? Specific procedures for implementing overcorrection vary greatly. Factors such as type and severity of problem behavior, its effects on the environment, the setting, and desired alternative behavior, and the learner's current skills should be considered. Figure 1410 provides general guidelines for implementing overcorrection. So I love to reference these procedures whenever Cooper does write out procedures, because I feel like a lot of times as a BCBA, you kind of get thrown into the field. And so I know when like my first year, I was always like referencing these little procedures. So maybe like bookmark this page because it's giving you some pretty descriptive procedures for positive punishment overcorrection. Okay, let's see what it says. Immediately upon the occurrence of the problem behavior or the discovery of its effects in a calm, unemotional tone of voice. This will also help you guys if you're writing the intervention for your BIs or RBTs, because Cooper gives a really good explanation. So in an unemotional tone of voice, tell the learner that he has misbehaved and provide a brief explanation for why the behavior must be corrected. Do not criticize or scold. Overcorrection entails a logically related consequence to reduce future occurrences of the problem behavior. Criticism and scolding do not enhance the tactic's effectiveness and may harm the relationship between the learner and the practitioner. So that's a very good little ending sentence, is making sure that you're not reprimanding them or raising your voice in any way, because again, it can also have negative effects on their rapport. Provide explicit verbal instructions describing the overcorrection sequence the learner must perform. Implement the overcorrection sequence as soon as possible after the problem behavior has occurred. When circumstances prevent immediately commencing the overcorrection sequence, tell the learner when the overcorrection process will be conducted. Several studies have found that overcorrection conducted at a later time can be effective. Okay, so that's for those rule-governed people where it's like, okay, well, we're not going to do it right now, but later we're going to clean the entire classroom or something like that. Monitor the learner throughout the overcorrection activity. Provide the minimal number of response prompts, including gentle physical guidance needed to ensure that the learner performs the entire overcorrection sequence. Provide the learner with minimal feedback for correct responses. Do not give too much praise or attention to the learner during the overcorrection sequence. Provide praise, attention, and perhaps other forms of reinforcement to the learner each time he spontaneously performs the appropriate behavior during typical activities. Although technically not part of the overcorrection procedure, reinforcing an alternative behavior is recommended. Complement to all punishment-based interventions. Okay, so that the physical guidance part, that also brought like a light bulb moment in my mind of like other reasons why it's kind of unethical is overcorrection in the way where you're like telling them pick it up and then they're not doing it, and so they're like hand over hand making them clean up the blocks, and maybe they only dropped one block but you're making him clean up 5 or 10 of the blocks, and you're using that hand over hand physical guidance. So because overcorrection is a procedure that you are likely to get physical or it's a possibility that you might get physical or that your technician might get physical, always consider whether you want to implement that or not. So I always tell people, if his mom was watching you right now, would you still do that? And so like as a BCBA, I feel like you should program the same way so that you don't put your technicians in a situation where they feel uncomfortable.
I've had to say that to a BCBA, believe
But
it or
I
not.
don't know if that's just me, like I'm just soft.
Right. I
I'm
said
just
that
a
before.
softie.
Yeah, would you do that would you have said that if his mother was in the room? I said
Yeah.
that before. Mhm.
Yeah, so that's how I always train my technicians. And then I guess now BCBAs, it's a good way to think, like, should I, under any circumstance, ever implement overcorrection if I know that there's a possibility that my technician might have to get physical with this client and then mom might possibly be watching, and that just doesn't look good. It does. Me as a mother, I would be upset if somebody is like hand over hand my special needs child. I don't know. It's just
Yeah. Mhm.
so it's just one of those ethical considerations that you always want to be careful with those type of procedures. Okay. Guidelines for using punishment. Guidelines for implementing it. Okay, so be aware of several potential problems and limitations associated with overcorrection. It's labor intensive, time consuming, and requires the full attention of the practitioner implementing it. Implementing overcorrection usually requires the practitioner to monitor the learner directly through the overcorrection process. Second, for overcorrection to be effective as punishment, the time that the learner spends with the person monitoring the overcorrection sequence must not be reinforcing. If it is, it just might be worth waxing the entire kitchen floor if mom chats with you and provides milk and cookies and a break from your work. So always taking into consideration all of those other factors, like, wait a minute, is this for escape now? Now he's just trying to escape his task, and mom always gets so happy that he's waxing the floor that she brings us milk and cookies. So now we're like no longer using a punishment procedure. Third, a child who misbehaves frequently may not execute a long list of cleanup behaviors just because he was told to do so. Asrin and Biazel recommended 3 strategies to minimize the likelihood of refusal to perform the overcorrection sequence. Okay, so this might be something good to highlight too. Remind the learner what the more severe disciplinary action will be, and if the refusal persists, then impose that discipline. Discuss the need for correction before the problem behavior occurs. Establish correction as an expectation and routine habit for any disruptive behavior. Okay. Those were some good little tips there. If the child resists too strongly or becomes aggressive, overcorrection may not be a viable treatment. Adult learners must voluntarily make the decision to perform the overcorrection routine. So that's another thing, right? Going back into ethical considerations is like, if it's an adult learner, they remember at the end of the day, your client should have the final say on their treatment. And so if he's like, I don't think overcorrection is necessary, then you ethically, you have a responsibility to find an alternative intervention. And then again, remember we talked about how overcorrection can be a physical type of intervention. So if you have a severely aggressive client, I'm not going to make my technicians do overcorrection for toy cleanup if I know they're possibly going to get headbutted or bit or something like that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What if, like, for example, adults say if they're in like a group home or say like they're not their legal guardian, if they're at home, can they still disagree with the treatment and you have to come up with an alternative?
They're not their legal guardian. So they are non-conserved, or
Right.
they are conserved.
Like somebody went to, like how the parents go to court and get like,
Yeah, like I'm like kind of like Britney Spears.
yes, kind of like that. Yep. Once
So
they
like,
turn 21, you have to 18 or 21, depending on the state, you have to go and do it's expensive too.
yeah, so you say I'm responsible for making the decisions for this
Mhm.
person.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that means that they're like in a conservatorship, I guess that's what they call them. And so then I guess you would always, so that's where it gets like kind of tricky, because then the parent also has a say. But as far as your ethical responsibility, your client should also always have a say. So maybe I would try to take both opinions into account, just so that I make sure I'm acting as ethically as possible. So if mom wants to implement this punishment procedure, but then adult client is like, I don't really think that's necessary, then I would be like, well, what do you think we should do? Or, I would just try to talk with them and be
They're an
like,
adult.
yeah, try to figure out what alternatives, especially because they're adults. And I always tell them like, I'm here to help you. I'm a behavior analyst. Like I study this stuff. I love it. I believe in it. I even do the book clubs about it. Like I love this stuff and it works. And I've seen it work. I use it on myself. I use it on my kids. So I am here to give you all of the tools you need to manage your behavior. And then it's up to you to use them or not.
Okay.
So that's the way that I've been talking to them since now I have a bunch of olders.
Right.
So it's been interesting. It's been like a learning curve for me because I'm used to them not being able to talk and so it's so different with adults.
It is. Yeah, because they will say like this is childlike or that, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that part.
Yeah. And I love that. I think that they should, that we should promote self-advocacy. So like, oh, okay, you don't think that that's necessary? Well, and what I tell them, I'm like, okay, well, let me probe it out. Just show me that you know it so we can get rid of that one. Or,
Right.
Like if it's like a skill and they're like, oh, I already know that. Why does she ask me that over and over? It's like, oh, okay, well, I could get rid of it. You just got to show me that you know it. And so let me ask you right now, you got it? Okay, cool. Let me remove it. And so I do my best to like accommodate to them. That way they trust me. And when I do ask them for something, they're like, okay, fine. Like, I guess you know what you're talking about. So I'll do it. So I do my best to try to like accommodate all of those concerns, like, oh, this is childlike, or oh, she already asked me that question a million times. And it's like, okay, well, as long as you answer it correctly 3 times in a row, it'll be gone, or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Guidelines, is that the one we were just on? Did I just skip everything? Overcorrection, guidelines. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I skipped. Okay, guidelines for using punishment. Assuming that habituation, treatment integrity, reinforcement, and training issues can be addressed, Punishment can yield rapid, long-lasting suppression of problem behavior. Unfortunately, however, agency policies, human subject review procedures, and historical practices have limited the use of punishment for research and treatment in clinic-based settings. Still, punishment may be a treatment of choice when, okay, we can highlight this, that way we know when we can use it per Cooper's advice. A problem behavior produces serious physical harm and must be suppressed quickly. Okay, so that's one consideration, I guess, or reason why you might need to use punishment. So behavior produces serious physical harm and must be suppressed quickly. Reinforcement-based interventions have not reduced the problem behavior to socially acceptable levels. So like I said, you've exhausted all your reinforcement options. You've tried every reinforcement, differential reinforcement, antecedent-based strategy, like you've done everything and it's not working. Or C, the reinforcer maintaining the problem behavior cannot be identified or withheld. So we can't figure out the function, right? So we're like, I don't even know why this is happening. So I'm just gonna implement this really quick punishment procedure because I know it'll get rid of it or something like that. So we don't know what is reinforcing it. If the decision is made to use a punishment-based intervention, steps should be taken to ensure that the intended punisher actually works. The guidelines that follow will help practitioners apply punishment with optimal effectiveness while minimizing undesirable side effects and problems. We base these guidelines on the assumption that the analyst has conducted a functional behavior assessment to identify the variables that maintain the problem behavior, that the problem behavior has been defined clearly, and that the participant cannot avoid or escape the punisher. Okay, so I'm just gonna list these and we won't go into them. We'll go into them next time, but here are some how to select effective and appropriate punishers. So I feel like we might want to go more into detail with these, but I'll just kind of read them off. So conduct punisher assessments. Use varied punishers of sufficient quality and intensity. Use varied punishers. Okay, deliver the punisher at the beginning of a behavioral sequence. Punish each instance of the behavior initially. So same thing as reinforcement, right? You want to put it on an FR1, punish it every time. Gradually shift to an intermittent schedule of punishment. So same thing as reinforcement. We're not going to keep you on an FR1 forever. We're eventually going to start fading out that consequence. Mediate unavoidable response to punishment delay. Supplement punishment with complementary interventions. Watch and prepare for the negative side effects. Record, graph, and evaluate data daily. That's an important thing to note as well, is the daily. So if you're using a punishment procedure, you want to make sure that you're evaluating your graph daily. Because if I'm doing something that's just increasing the behavior and I'm using punishment, then you want to make sure that you catch that quickly. So that's why that's one of those that you need to make sure you're monitoring it daily, making sure that it is effective. And if it's not, then you need to get rid of that right away. Okay, and then we can go more into detail on all of those next week, if you guys want to. If not, then we can just keep on going. I'm going to pause the recording.